Have you ever wondered what would happen if one day you woke up in a completely different body with no memory of who you are? How would you get on? And where would your search for answers lead you? There have been a number of Pokemon spin-offs over the years, but none have been so prolific as the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon series. In this video, we're going to take an in-depth look at Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team DX for the Nintendo Switch. Let's get started. To understand Pokémon Mystery Dungeon, we first need to understand just Mystery Dungeon, without the Pokémon. Mystery Dungeon is a series of roguelike games developed by Spike Chunsoft, or just Chunsoft as they were formerly known. It was founded by Koichi Nakamura, who is one of the co-creators of the Dragon Quest series. Chunsoft actually developed the first 5 Dragon Quest games for Enix before eventually breaking away to work on other projects. One of these projects was known as Torneko no Daiboken Fushigi no Dungeon, which starred a merchant from Dragon Quest IV. The hope was to, quote, let people get acclimated with what a roguelike system was. Because we had the familiar Dragon Quest setting, they could just focus on the game mechanics. The goal here was largely to bring this genre to a new audience who might otherwise have an aversion to it due to the difficulty. Nakamura noted that there was a staff member on team who really liked Rogue, but Rogue is a very difficult game, a very hardcore game. In the beginning, I played it for a whole week and didn't see what was supposed to be so fun about it. But after that, I started to understand the game. Ultima and Wizardry are also difficult games, but what we did with those games is they took those games and made a more easy to understand version of them, which was Dragon Quest. We wanted to approach Rogue in a similar way, make a more understandable, more easy to play version of Rogue, which was the Mystery Dungeon series. Torneko's Big Adventure was the first title we put out in the series. Eventually, Chunsoft started to branch out the franchise from its Dragon Quest roots to create their own original series known as Shiren the Wanderer, due to there being things the developers wanted to try that, quote, didn't fit into the Dragon Quest framework. Shiren was our way to kind of move away from that and do our own thing. However, they only saw moderate success. At least that was until they decided to combine their formula with the world's highest-selling multimedia franchise. The relationship between Chunsoft and the Pokémon Company goes back quite a while, since both Chunsoft and Pokémon Company owner Tsunekazu Ishihara had worked on a title for the Famicom together. Beyond that, Ishihara took quite a shining to Torneko, saying, "At the time, the tagline for the game claimed it was a game you could play 1,000 times, and I think that I, for one, really did." After I started working on the Pokemon games, therefore, I was always really keen to create a game that would connect Pokemon to the Mystery Dungeon series. Pokemon Mystery Dungeon was the game that arose from that desire. And thus, in 2005, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Red Rescue Team and Blue Rescue Team were released to astounding success, selling a combined 5.5 million copies between the two versions. That popularity led to the creation of a number of entries, including the far more successful and well-remembered sequels, Explorers of Time, Darkness, and Sky. There was also the Japan-only WiiWare titles, which exist and no one really talks about. After that is Gates to Infinity, which is considered to be a black sheep amongst the franchise. Super Mystery Dungeon was after that, and it brought the series more or less back in line with what it used to be. And lastly, we have the topic of today's video, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team DX, the Nintendo Switch remake of the original that started it all. Pokemon Mystery Dungeon is a bit of an acquired taste, if you ask me. Based on the lukewarm critical response and the much more positive fan response, except for Gates to Infinity that is, it's clear that this is something that you either find a repetitive, boring slog, or you get sucked in and wind up playing for 9 hours straight. Not that I would know, totally wouldn't know anything about that. As mentioned before, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon is a roguelike game, which means it's a top-down dungeon crawler where you explore randomly generated dungeons searching for the exit, battling enemies along the way. While the game appears to be in real time, the combat is actually turn-based, with a turn consisting of either moving to an adjacent tile or using a move. Dungeons are divided into floors, of which each dungeon has a predetermined number. These lengths range from as low as 3 in the early game dungeons to as much as 99 in the hardest ones. Each game also tends to have one 99 floor dungeon where you have to make it all the way to the top with no items and a single Pokemon, and they also reset you to level 1. During the main story, however, many dungeons have a checkpoint that's usually a few floors before the boss. The way combat works should seem familiar to anyone who's played a main series Pokemon game, with a few modifications, that is. For starters, damage modifiers for type matchups were reduced, with a super effective attack only dealing 1.4 times as much damage instead of the double damage that it does in the main games. In the older games, Pokemon that were normally immune to attacks still took a small amount of damage, but in the later games, this was changed to make them actually immune. Pokemon are also unable to evolve until a set point in the game, and even then, you just get set stat increases as base stats aren't really a thing the way they are in the main series. The biggest change to combat, however, is the way that moves work. Inheriting most of its mechanics from Super Mystery Dungeon, moves in Rescue Team DX have ranks, a mechanic that was first introduced in Gates to Infinity. This means that by using a move repeatedly, they get stronger. There are also some modifications with the power and accuracy of some moves to help balance out ones that can hit foes from far away. Inventory management is a huge thing in these games. You're only given so many slots to hold items, so you're actively discouraged from hoarding. You have a means of storing any items you're not using back in town, which is very important because if you faint, you lose everything. So it's important to only bring what you think you'll need and are willing to lose should things go awry. The main gameplay loop involves starting your day in town, having access to shops, storage, and a few other services before heading off to whatever dungeon you want to explore for the day. One of these services you have access to is the job board, which has a list of tasks that you can complete in certain dungeons, usually involving interacting with a certain Pokemon on a given floor. The player is able to take a certain number of jobs at any given time, which stay active until they're completed. You also get points from these jobs, which can increase your rank, which in turn upgrades a number of features including the size of your inventory and the number of jobs you're allowed to accept at any given time. Of course, no overview of a Pokemon game would be complete without talking about one of the hallmarks of the series, and that is the Pokemon themselves. Instead of catching Pokemon like you do in the main games, Pokemon are instead recruited through various means. The most common way occurs randomly when you knock out a Pokemon in battle, so long as the final blow is landed by a Pokemon that you are currently controlling and is no more than 2 tiles away. You are also able to recruit Pokemon as rewards for certain jobs by giving an apple to a fainted Pokemon you find in a dungeon and at certain points in the story. The story of this game isn't as deep or complex as some of the later games, but the story is still an important part of the game, and is something that at the time, Mystery Dungeon had as a selling point over the main series. Because of that, I'm going to give you a brief recap of the important story beats, just so that we're on the same page before we get into the analysis section. When you first start the game, you are greeted by a quiz that asks you a bunch of randomized questions. The game then uses your answers to determine what Pokemon you are going to play as for the majority of the game. The story centers around a human who has been transformed into a Pokemon, and has lost all of their memories in the process. It starts when you are awoken by a Pokemon who will later become your partner, where you learn that the world has been stricken by natural disasters. You get asked to form what's known as a rescue team, which you then accept. After a couple of rescues, including an encounter with Zapdos, you are suggested to ascend a place called the Hill of the Ancients, and consult with the Pokemon Xatu, who explains to you that your presence and the natural disasters are actually linked, but doesn't say much else. The next day, you start hearing about something called the Ninetales legend. Basically, in this legend, a human ended up grabbing one of the tails of the Pokemon Ninetales, which led to a 1,000-year-long curse, only to have their Pokemon Gardevoir step in and take the curse in their stead. The human, instead of trying to help Gardevoir, turns tail and runs, abandoning the Pokemon to its fate. Ninetales then predicts that the human would eventually be reborn as a Pokemon, and that when that happened, the world's balance would be upset. The day after hearing this, you see one of the Pokemon Gengar in the square. It turns out he overheard the conversation with Xatu, and because he doesn't like you, he decides to tell everyone that you are the human from the legend. You, not being certain that you aren't that human, say nothing, leading to all the Pokemon to assume that you are. Due to this, you are forced to become fugitives and run away from town. You manage to outrun the other Pokemon for a while until you eventually get caught by a super strong group called Team ACT. The showdown is short-lived though, as Ninetales shows up and explains that you in fact are not the human from this legend. This enables you to return to town cleared of all charges. There is no time to rest, however, as the natural disasters end up worsening, with a series of bad earthquakes that eventually lead to a fight with Groudon. After subduing the beast, you hear from Xatu that there is now a giant meteor headed towards Earth, and the only way to stop it is to ascend the Sky Tower to enlist the help of Rayquaza in destroying it. Damn, is Rayquaza's everyone go-to meteor stopper in this world? The night before setting off, the player is greeted by Gardevoir in a dream that says that stopping the meteor is their whole purpose for becoming a Pokemon, and that after that, they will return to their original life. After reaching the top of Sky Tower and defeating Rayquaza in the final boss battle, you have him destroy the meteor with Hyper Beam. However, the meteor has become so close that the resulting blast means you and your partner don't make it. Not all is lost, however, as you are brought back from the brink of death by none other than Gengar. Upon your triumphant return, there is a huge celebration on the Hill of the Ancients when Gardevoir tells you that it's time to leave. It's at this point that everyone, including your partner, finds out what's happening, leading to a very tearful goodbye. This goodbye doesn't last long, however, as you are told that you are able to come back if you wish strong enough, leading to you reappearing right in front of the rescue base after the credits. See, there's still a happy ending to this story, even if you're emotionally manipulated for a couple of minutes. Later, in the post-game, you eventually learn that Gengar is trying to climb Mount Freeze, where you previously met Ninetales. You go with him, where he then reveals that he is the human from the legend and wishes to have the curse on Gardevoir lifted. Ninetales ends up giving him the aptly named Ninetales crest and sends him and the party off to Murky Cave, where you then end up finding Gardevoir, who is saved, but loses all of her memory of Gengar in the process. Okay, we're finally done with the summary. That's everything that's important for our purposes. Let's get into the analysis. According to Ishihara, the idea of the game was to combine aspects of both the Mystery Dungeon and Pokémon series. By combining that kind of unique aspect of a dungeon-based RPG with Tomi-san's script, I think our games are well deployed as devices that allow players to read deeper into the Pokémon legend. With the first title in the series, I felt that we'd added new elements to the type of RPG we wanted to create and broadened the game's horizon as a result. So the main focus of our analysis is going to be to examine what those two elements are and how the game explores each of them. One of the main themes of the Mystery Dungeon series, according to Daiichi no Nagahata, the director of Red and Blue Rescue Team, is tension and reasoning. Nakamura has gone on record to explain that the game is designed so that you're supposed to never quite feel 100% comfortable with it. When you play the game, the maps and items change every time you play it. So no matter how many times you play the game, you won't get used to it. You won't get bored of it. So that's one of the attractions. And also, by playing the game over and over, you improve your skills because it always turns into an original game. You start learning how to approach problems in the game, the tense feeling of that, and also the satisfaction of getting yourself involved. That's the attraction. Tension is largely maintained by the number of random elements that appear in different dungeons. As the player, you're forced to make considerations such as whether or not to bring multiples of an item, just in case one of them gets destroyed by a trap or moves like Incinerate or Bug Bite. Because you never know what exactly to expect, just what vaguely might show up in a particular run, the game encourages you not just to plan ahead, but to be adaptable should something happen. A prime example of this is what happens in the phenomenon known as a monster house, where a bunch of enemies appear in a room, which, if you're not careful, can easily lead to a wipeout. Do you pack a move that hits the whole room, or do you use the corridor as a choke point to take out the enemies one at a time? The monster house is the epitome of tension, and they are often very stressful situations to deal with as the player. Overall, the game is very effective, maybe even too effective, at creating tension. The reasoning aspect comes in largely in part by the fact that the game never rushes you. The fully turn-based nature of combat allows you to take as much time as you need to make the best decision possible. This isn't like Final Fantasy where you're expected to make quick decisions. This also comes in with the fact that, with the exception of the Fugitive arc, you are never forced into a story objective. This isn't a game like Persona where you have any strict deadlines. The game allows you to use your time as you see fit. You want to leave poor Shiftry to be trapped with Zapdos for 3 weeks as you grind out jobs to stock up on good items and gain experience? Go right ahead. Even during the Fugitive arc, while you lose access to most of the dungeons, the game always gives you a shorter dungeon that's fairly easy to go through that allows you to stock up on items. Again, despite the dire circumstances of having a bunch of Pokemon hot in your trail trying to kill you, the game allows you to head through the dungeons as many times as you need before heading forward. Another theme that we see quite a bit is exploration. Since again, each dungeon is randomized, you have no idea where it's going to dump you or where the stairs are relative to you. You might get lucky and get set down right next to them, or you might have to go all the way across the floor to find them. This theme is slightly undercut early on due to every dungeon up to and including Sky Tower showing you where every enemy and item is at all times. Unfortunately, this does go away in the post-game and you're forced to find everything for yourself. Even with the ability to see everything though, you still have that emphasis on exploration because it gives you more of an incentive to go around and see what all of the items are instead of making a straight beeline for the stairs. One of the best ways this game rewards exploration can be seen in the Unknown and Buried Relic dungeons, which have rare items in the walls, many of which offer permanent stat upgrades, which, unlike in the main series, never cut off until you reach max stats. If you're diligent enough to grab every item in one of those dungeons, the ladder of which is 99 floors long, you can become fairly strong in the process. This theme of exploration is so strong that even the game's UI and the structure of the post-game emphasizes it. When you head off to a dungeon, the menu to select what dungeon you want to go to is sorted in the following order: storyline objectives, followed by dungeons that you haven't been to yet, then the ones with jobs, and then everything else. The game does as much as it can to encourage you to go to places that you haven't been to yet. In addition, the post-game consists of 5 different plot threads which unlock by doing certain objectives, but it is possible to have multiple running concurrently. The emphasis here is on choice, which in an era of 20-hour playable movies is much appreciated. Coupled with this theme of discovery is this sense of mystery to it all. Many of the post-game story objectives involve new places that have previously been undiscovered, such as the Stormy Sea and the previously discussed Buried Relic. There's a whole quest line where you're trying to find out the identity of the Mirage Pokémon, which becomes very apparent that it's Ho-Oh if you know anything about Pokémon lore, but it's still a really cool concept when you first find out about it. One thing I actually like about this game is the way in which it isn't afraid to pull lore from the most obscure places and make them the center point of the plot. The Ninetales legend actually comes from the Pokédex entry for Ninetales in Pokémon Red and Blue, which reads, "Very smart and very vengeful. Grabbing one of its many tails could result in a 1,000-year curse." There's also the fact that the Buried Relic where you find Mew also contains the Regigolems, which, due to this being Generation 3 and Regigigas not being a thing yet, instead use the connection between the two as shown in the movie Lucario and the Mystery of Mew. The anime references don't stop there either, as the camp where you recruit the legendary birds to, Legendary Island, contains similar looking temples to the ones seen in Pokemon the Movie 2000. You also have to recruit all 3 of them in order to unlock the dungeon where you find Lugia. This discovery, however, is not limited to the world. In fact, a good chunk of the plot involves the player's journey of self-discovery. Cliche as having an amnesiac protagonist is in video games, it works here because it forces you to piece together why you're here and discover what your true purpose is. There's a reason that the game doesn't tell you until right before Sky Tower that your purpose is to stop the disasters, because that way, you don't have the whole, "I'm saving the world because I'm the chosen one," even if you technically are. The point is that by that moment in the story, you've already taken on that role when you subdued Groudon, something that even one of the best rescue teams failed to do. You were the chosen one without ever being told by anyone that you were. There's one more major theme I'd like to discuss, and that's the pretty obvious one, and it's friendship. So this is the main contribution from the Pokemon series, something that even the Pope recognized. One of the early ways this is shown is how all of the work you do as a rescue team is based around helping those in need. Help rescue my child who's fallen into a chasm that's opened up into a ground. Find my lost item. Escort me through this dangerous place to help me find my friend. Every single job you take from the rescue service is tied to that theme. In fact, the game doesn't just limit you to helping these fictional characters either. Accessed either directly from the title screen or from the Pelipper post office in Pokemon Square, you are able to rescue people who have fainted in dungeons, be it your friends or random strangers on the internet. In fact, in the old games, you weren't able to launch a self-rescue mission like you were in Rescue Team DX. You had to rely on other people, thus making the game encourage this even more. The game also rewards this stuff pretty well, so there's even more incentive to lending your fellow player a hand. Beyond those aspects, the game also puts that focus in dungeons with the way you recruit Pokemon. Yeah, you can get them by defeating Pokemon in battle, but as mentioned before, you can also get them by reviving fainted Pokemon by giving them apples, which is a guaranteed recruit that also always has a rare quality, which makes them better than the ones that you get by battling. By having this system, it makes it so that your goodwill is always rewarded by friends who are willing to help you in return. The friendship theme was even stronger in the original when camps were known as friend areas. Why this change was made is beyond me. I have no clue why they did this. It makes so much more sense with the themes if they were kept as friend areas. And while mechanics do play an important role in getting these themes across, the story is actually more important and does a better job. The bond between you and your partner is shown to be very strong across the entire adventure, and even when you learn about the Ninetales legend, and all evidence at the time points to you being the human from that legend, your partner still trusts you and says as much, as do a number of Pokemon you help across your journey, all of whom appear to see you off as you begin the fugitive arc. The message is very clear. True friends always stand by your side no matter what. This idea extends to the ending, where when you're given the choice, the player chooses to come back after seeing how utterly devastated their partner was by the parting. It's this moment, the bond between these two characters, one that gets unfairly ripped apart by forces that's beyond our character's control, that makes these games so memorable. Out of anything that happens in any Mystery Dungeon game, it's this ending that sticks with me. Even as an adult who played Blue Rescue Team and knew what the ending was, something that even new players know because Gardevoir literally tells you, it got me. It's honestly the perfect ending that hammers home this theme of friendship and how important it is, and how sometimes you don't realize it until that person is gone. Hell, it's an ending that they liked so much that they basically duplicated it 3 more times. You see this idea of trust extend even to Gardevoir and Gengar. In that dream right before Sky Tower, Gardevoir informs you that she liked her trainer, even if that wasn't reciprocated. She took the curse out of caring for him. Gengar, of course, didn't know this until he tried to eat your dream, which is a scene that doesn't make much sense when you first see it, but after you complete Murky Cave, it does. What's more is that Gengar's heart is stated to be conflicted during the post-game side quest. After learning that Gardevoir not only remembers him, but even liked him despite what he did, goes to show how much emphasis the game places on the idea of trust. It's enough to make Gengar go about the process of changing his ways. To summarize, Pokémon Mystery Dungeon is a game about always standing with your friends in the face of adversity, and boldly setting off into the unknown no matter what may await you. The game puts a huge focus on strategy and planning, allowing you to advance the story at your own pace. I personally see no better series to fully realize the potential of the Pokémon world than Mystery Dungeon. Here's to Pokémon Mystery Dungeon, ever shall she reign. Like, seriously, Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Explorers DX when now? Also, I get that criticism is subjective and everyone is entitled to their own opinion, but what were those reviewers smoking when they played these games? Like, seriously, these games are amazing. What the hell, guys? Anyways, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up. If you want to see more of these long-form type analysis videos of games in the future, be sure to hit that subscribe button and click on the little bell icon next to it. Also, if you have any fun and unique Mystery Dungeon stories you'd like to share, go ahead and let me know in the comments. But until next time, guys, peace.